What would you do if a 9-year-old girl in a tattered coat and duct-taped boots told you she could heal your child, and then proved it? The cold that morning didn't care who you were. It clawed through coats, crept under scarves, and stung fingers no matter how tightly they clutched coffee cups. The sidewalks outside Birmingham's Children's Medical Center were slick with frost, not enough to freeze the city, but enough to make people hurry. Nurses coming off the night shift walked fast, heads down. Parents ushering in sleepy kids with fevers barely noticed anything but the revolving glass doors in front of them. Everyone moved with purpose, eyes forward, trying to outrun the thing that brought them here: disease, disability, fear. But one person wasn't in a hurry. She never was. She sat just outside the hospital's main entrance, where the sidewalk cracked slightly near a rusted trash can on a flattened cardboard box that had once carried canned soup. She was small, too small for her age, with a coat that clearly belonged to someone older. The sleeves were rolled 3 times at the cuffs, and the fabric hung off her shoulders like it was draped on a hanger. Her boots were battered, the right one held together with strips of silver duct tape that had seen better days. But what stood out most was the red wool hat pulled low over her curly hair, almost covering her eyes, but not enough to hide how alert they were. She wasn't sleeping, she wasn't asking for money, and she didn't speak unless someone spoke first. She just sat there with a notebook, its corners frayed and the spine reinforced with masking tape, drawing shapes and people and movements, like she was studying something the rest of the world had missed. Her name was Amara, but few people knew that. To most, she was just that girl outside the hospital, the one who showed up almost every Saturday, sometimes Sunday, never said much, and always had that same focused look, like she was waiting for something or someone. Some of the nurses had tried to ask where her parents were. Security had once told her to move along, but she was polite, quiet, never made a scene. Eventually, people stopped trying to get rid of her. In a place filled with chaos and heartbreak, her stillness became a kind of landmark. A few kind staffers had slipped her a granola bar now and then. Someone once gave her mittens. She always accepted gifts with a nod and a soft thank you, then went back to her sketching. She was young, but she had the kind of calm you'd expect from someone much older, like life had taught her lessons most kids had never even dreamed of. Across the street, in the loading zone marked for emergency drop-offs, a sleek black Mercedes idled next to a yellow curb. Its windows were tinted, but not enough to hide the shape of a man in the driver's seat. Jonathan Hale hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night for months. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly cut but looked like it hadn't been touched since yesterday. His designer coat was wrinkled at the collar, his tie crooked, his eyes bloodshot. The kind of exhaustion he carried didn't come from work, though he did plenty of that. It came from fear, the kind that settles deep in the gut when you've done everything right in life but still end up helpless. In the back seat, his daughter Ava sat in silence, 6 years old. Curls tucked neatly behind one ear, a pink blanket draped over her legs. Her eyes weren't glassy or tired or vacant. They were wide open, alive, but heavy in a way that made them seem older than they should be, a kind of awareness no child should carry. Before the accident, she was a firecracker, climbing trees, racing through sprinklers in the backyard, dancing to songs she didn't know the words to. Now she was paralyzed from the waist down, her body refusing to remember how to be a child. Jonathan opened the back door and gently unbuckled her from the booster seat. His hands were precise, practiced. He moved her like glassware. She didn't complain. She never did. She just looked up at the sky as he lifted her, as if she were trying to memorize something far away. He turned toward the hospital entrance, his eyes fixed forward, his thoughts looping through another round of hopeless appointments. He didn't see Amara sitting by the sidewalk. Most people didn't. But she saw him. She saw everything. She saw the way he adjusted his grip on Ava every few steps, like he didn't trust himself not to drop her. She noticed how Ava didn't look at the building, or the people, or even her father, but only at the clouds. She watched longer than she usually did. Then, just as Jonathan passed by, Amara stood. She didn't raise her voice, didn't shout. She just spoke with calm certainty. "Sir," she said, "I can make your daughter walk again." Jonathan stopped, mid-step, like someone had frozen time. He hadn't expected to hear anything from the sidewalk, much less a promise like that. For a moment, he didn't move. His arms locked tight around Ava's small frame, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. She didn't react either. Maybe she hadn't heard the voice, or maybe she was used to strange things being said around her by now. But Jonathan had heard it. Clear, measured. Not like a question, not like a sales pitch, not even like a plea. Just a statement of fact, delivered with a kind of stillness that made it land heavier than any shouting could have. He turned his head slowly, his gaze falling on the little girl in the red hat who stood no taller than Ava's chin. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't trying to charm him or grab attention. She just looked up at him with those steady, unblinking eyes. "What did you say?" Jonathan asked, his voice low, not quite angry, but definitely edged with disbelief. Amara didn't flinch. She tucked the ragged notebook under her arm like it was something sacred and stepped forward one small pace. "I said I can help her walk again." There was a long pause, the kind that stretches just a beat longer than comfort. Jonathan's mind flashed with everything he'd been through over the last 6 months. The scans, the surgeries, the specialists who used words like incomplete injury and permanent damage and function unlikely. Every doctor had the same face after saying it, a rehearsed blend of sympathy and clinical distance, like they'd done this 1,000 times and still couldn't make it sting less. He looked Amara over. The taped-up boots, the sleeves too long, the hat pulled low like armor. He almost scoffed. Almost. "That's not funny, kid," he said, not unkindly but firm. "This isn't something you joke about." "I'm not joking." Amara's tone didn't change. No tremble, no apology. Just the same soft resolve, the kind that doesn't come from being sure. It comes from being certain. Jonathan blinked. The wind picked up a bit and tugged Ava's blanket, and for a moment he almost turned away, almost kept walking like everyone else. But something about the way the girl was standing, she wasn't trying to convince him. She wasn't selling anything. She was just waiting, like she already knew he'd come back. He didn't say another word, just shook his head and walked inside, but the moment kept tugging at him. During Ava's physical therapy appointment, as the specialist gently rotated her legs and explained nerve pathways with diagrams Jonathan no longer had the heart to pretend to understand, Amara's voice echoed. "I can help her walk again." It was ridiculous, completely absurd. But the absurd part wasn't what bothered him, it was how serious she'd been. Not naive, not overconfident. Serious, like someone who'd already seen it happen. He sat in the waiting room scrolling through work emails, barely reading them. One therapist came out and mentioned small improvements, and another gave him a packet of exercises to try at home. None of it stuck. His head was somewhere else. Or rather, on someone else. The girl with the red hat. How had she known what to say? Why had her voice stayed with him longer than all the medical jargon he'd absorbed this year? Ava was unusually quiet as they left the hospital, not sleepy quiet, but the thoughtful kind. She looked at the sky again while he carried her, fingers curled loosely around his jacket collar. As they reached the street, Jonathan's eyes flicked to the sidewalk without meaning to, and there she was, same spot, same cardboard. But she wasn't drawing this time, she was just looking at him. She stood up slowly, as if she'd expected this moment. Jonathan hesitated. He didn't have a plan for this. He walked over cautiously, Ava light in his arms, the weight of the conversation heavier than the child he was carrying. "You again," he said under his breath. "Why would you say something like that? You think this is funny?" His voice was low, but sharp now. Less disbelief, more defensiveness. Amara shook her head. "No, sir. You don't even know her," he snapped. "You don't know what she's been through. What we've been through." Amara didn't move. "I don't have to know her to want to help." He looked at her again, really looked. 9 years old, maybe 10. Standing outside a hospital in winter with boots falling apart and nothing to her name but a sketchbook and a memory. "You're a little girl sitting outside a hospital with duct tape on your shoes. What could you possibly know about helping someone like my daughter?" She glanced down for the first time, her fingers brushing the edge of her notebook. Her voice dropped a little. "My mama used to help people walk again. She was a physical therapist. She showed me things. She said the body remembers even when it forgets, you just have to show it how. Jonathan's breath caught for half a second. He hadn't expected that. He didn't know why, but it landed heavier than he wanted it to. So you watched her do a few stretches, and now you think you're some kind of doctor. I watched her help a man walk after 5 years in a chair. Amara's eyes lifted to meet his again. She didn't have machines. She didn't even have a clinic. Just her hands, her voice, her belief. And it worked. Jonathan glanced around. A nurse walking by gave Amara a brief wave. A janitor sweeping the sidewalk gave her a small nod. They knew her, not as a nuisance, as someone who'd been there, someone who belonged. "I'm not giving you money," he said abruptly. "I didn't ask for money." "Then what do you want?" "1 hour," Amara said. "Let me show you. If nothing happens, I won't bother you again." Jonathan looked down at Ava, whose eyes were now open and watching the girl. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She looked interested, curious, and maybe, just maybe, hopeful. Jonathan sighed, rubbed a hand down his face. "I should walk away right now." Amara didn't move. "I should call security." She remained still. After a long pause, he said, "Harrington Park. Tomorrow. Noon. Don't be late." Amara nodded once. "I'll be there." Jonathan turned and walked toward the car, his footsteps louder than before. He didn't look back. But in the rearview mirror, as he pulled away, he saw the girl still standing there. Red hat tugged low, notebook under her arm, waiting for the next moment like she knew exactly what was coming. The next morning was colder than the one before. A biting wind swept through Harrington Park, rattling the last brown leaves from the oak trees and tugging at the chains of the empty swing set. There was nothing particularly special about the park. The basketball court was cracked down the middle, the grass was patchy and overrun by clumps of dirt, and the old benches leaned slightly from years of use and weather. It wasn't the kind of place people chose to be. It was just the kind of place that was there, forgotten by most. But that morning, at exactly 11:45, Amara arrived. She carried a faded green gym bag that looked nearly as old as she was. Her red hat was pulled low again, curls tucked beneath it, cheeks flushed pink from the wind. She walked straight to the bench nearest the big oak tree, unzipped her bag, and began to lay out what little she had. A folded towel, a small glass jar of cocoa butter, a tennis ball with the fuzz worn down, a plastic container wrapped in cloth that held something warm. It steamed slightly in the cold air. And then she waited, legs tucked under her, notebook beside her, eyes scanning the path like she was tracking a sunrise. At 12:07, the black Mercedes pulled up along the edge of the park. Jonathan stepped out first, this time not in a rush. He didn't speak, didn't wave. He walked around to the back seat and unbuckled Ava, lifting her gently into her wheelchair. Her pink blanket was neatly folded on her lap, and a knitted headband pushed her curls away from her face. She didn't say anything, but her eyes darted around, searching. When she spotted Amara by the bench, her expression shifted. Subtle, but enough. A flicker of recognition, maybe curiosity, maybe something warmer. Jonathan wheeled Ava slowly across the uneven path. He kept one hand tight on the chair handle and the other stuffed in his coat pocket. His posture was stiff, guarded. He wasn't here to be impressed. He was here because something in him wouldn't let him ignore that girl's voice. Not yet. Amara stood as they approached. "Hi again," she said, her voice quiet but deliberate. Jonathan gave a brief nod. Ava raised one hand in a soft wave. "Hi," she said. Amara smiled at her. "Hi, Ava." That caught Jonathan off guard. "How do you know her name?" he asked quickly. "You said it yesterday," Amara replied. "I remember things." Jonathan glanced at the towel on the grass. So what now? Magic carpet ride? Amara didn't respond to the sarcasm. "No, sir. Just the basics." She turned and knelt beside the towel. She unfolded it slowly, then reached for the cloth-wrapped container. When she unwrapped it, the scent of warm rice drifted up, subtle and familiar. She didn't rush. She moved like someone performing a ritual, not a trick. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. What's all that? My mom's things, Amara said. Well, some of them. She used to heat rice like this and wrap it in cloth. Said it was better than any machine when muscles were tight. The ball is for pressure points. The cocoa butter helps with motion. It's all simple. Jonathan crouched slightly, unsure whether to laugh or walk away. You really think this, whatever this is going to do something? Amara turned to Ava. If it's okay with you, can I work with your legs a little? It won't hurt. And if anything feels weird, just tell me and I'll stop. Ava looked up at her dad. He was quiet for a moment, then exhaled through his nose. You can try, he said, but be careful. Amara nodded. She knelt beside Ava's chair, gently unfolded the pink blanket from her lap, and rested the warm rice cloth on her thighs. Ava flinched slightly at first. Too hot? Amara asked. Ava shook her head. Number it feels nice. They waited, just for a minute, letting the heat sink in. Then Amara placed her fingers just above Ava's knees and began moving her legs, slowly, carefully, not pulling, not pushing, just guiding. She rotated them side to side, lifting gently, feeling for resistance. She never forced anything. She kept her eyes on Ava's face the whole time, watching every flicker of discomfort, every shift in her breathing. Jonathan hovered, arms crossed, ready to intervene. He didn't trust this. He didn't understand it. But he also didn't stop it. You ever do this before? He asked. Amara nodded. A lot. My mum took me with her to shelters, clinics, people who couldn't afford therapy. She said everyone deserves to feel human again. I used to carry her bag. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. And she taught you this stuff? She said the body doesn't always need fancy, Amara replied. It just needs attention, consistency, and belief. She tapped gently on Ava's knee. Can you feel that? Ava stared at her leg. No, she whispered. That's okay, Amara said, completely unfazed. We'll keep asking. Sometimes the nerves are like kids hiding in a game. They need to know it's safe to come out. As she worked, she kept Ava talking, asked her about her favorite cartoons, favorite flavor of ice cream, her favorite color, and Ava, who usually gave one-word answers to everyone else, began to answer with real sentences. Then she started asking questions too. Do you live around here? Kind of. Do you go to school? I used to. Why not? Amara paused for a second. My mum got sick. Then she passed. I've been figuring stuff out since. Ava looked down at her own legs. I'm sorry. Amara gave a small smile. Thanks. Jonathan watched, arms still folded, but the stiffness in his shoulders had started to fade. This didn't look like a trick. This looked real, not dramatic, not instant. But something was shifting. Not just Ava's toes or the way her knees gently moved under Amara's hands, but the way she was present, engaged. The Ava he'd missed for months, buried under quiet sadness and the weight of helplessness, was starting to peek through again. After a while, Amara tapped gently on Ava's ankle. Can you feel that? Ava blinked. Maybe? Like pressure? Jonathan stepped forward. She says that sometimes during her sessions. Amara nodded. Yeah, but those sessions are in a cold room full of machines. Kids tighten up around machines, but here... She looked up at the trees. There's air, there's light. It feels different. Jonathan didn't say anything, but his expression had changed. The skepticism hadn't vanished, but it had softened into something else. Something like reluctant curiosity, or maybe the faintest flicker of hope. Amara finished the movements, helped Ava stretch her feet gently, then leaned back and rested on her heels. I'll show you again next week, she said, starting to pack her things. It takes time, but your muscles... She pointed to Ava's legs. They still remember what to do. You just have to remind them. Ava smiled. Not big, not showy, but genuine. Jonathan cleared his throat. "We're not promising anything," he said quickly. Amara shook her head. "I'm not either. I'm just trying." He stared at her for a long moment. Then, almost without thinking, reached into his coat and pulled out a folded bill. Amara took a small step back. "No, sir. I don't want your money." Jonathan paused, confused. "Then why are you doing this?" Amara glanced at Ava, who was still smiling softly. "Because your daughter smiled." Jonathan looked down at Ava, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel like the only thing holding her together. Something else was starting to build around her. Something that wasn't pity, something that felt almost like strength, and it came from a girl with nothing in her pockets, but everything where it counted. The next Sunday, Amara was already at Harrington Park by the time the church bells rang in the distance. Her red hat bobbed slightly as she walked the familiar path to the oak tree, the same towel tucked under her arm, her old gym bag hanging by her side. It had been a long week, the kind where the nights felt longer than they should, and the cold seeped into your thoughts, not just your bones. She'd slept in 2 different places that week, once behind a diner where the cook let her have soup and an empty booth after closing, and once under the steps of the library, tucked into her blanket like a cocoon. But none of that showed on her face. When she laid out her things and knelt beside the towel, her hands moved with purpose. She might have been tired, but her spirit wasn't. Her eyes stayed sharp. Her focus didn't waver. She wasn't just showing up for Ava anymore. She was showing up for something bigger, though she couldn't quite name it yet. The Mercedes pulled up at 12:03, and for the first time, Ava was already smiling before the door opened. Jonathan helped her out with practiced ease, but today he didn't look quite as tight around the shoulders. His steps weren't rushed, and his face didn't look like it had been carved from stone. There was something different about him, a quietness in his eyes that hinted he was starting to believe the impossible might not be so impossible anymore. "Hi, Ava," Amara greeted, the warmth in her voice like a blanket. "Hi," Ava said back, her voice brighter than the week before. Jonathan nodded at Amara as he wheeled his daughter forward. He didn't say much, but he no longer seemed like a man looking for reasons to walk away. Amara didn't waste time. She got right to work. Warm cloth over Ava's thighs, cocoa butter massaged into stiff knees, tennis ball rolled under the arches of her feet. Each motion was small, deliberate, and thoughtful. No rush, no promises. Just presence. That was the gift she brought more than anything. She gave every second her full attention, like Ava was the only person in the world who mattered in that moment. "Can you press your heel into the ground?" Amara asked after a few minutes. Ava frowned slightly, eyes closed in concentration. Nothing happened, not even a twitch. "It's okay," Amara said gently. "Sometimes your brain has to look for the path. Like walking through a crowd, you just have to push your way forward." Jonathan stood with his arms folded again, but now it looked more like he was keeping himself warm than defending against disappointment. He wasn't guarding himself anymore, he was waiting. "Why do you do all this?" he asked, his voice quieter than before, with less edge and more curiosity. Amara looked up. "Because I remember what it felt like when my mum used to help people. She didn't care if they were rich or poor, if they smelled clean or slept on a bench. She made them feel like they mattered. I want to do that too." Jonathan nodded slowly, his eyes drifting toward Ava, who was now trying to curl her toes. Just a little, barely a flicker, but they moved. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. The look on his face was enough. He'd seen it, and seeing it changed everything. For the next few Sundays, they kept returning. Same park, same time. Amara showed Ava how to use rubber bands for ankle strength. She placed marbles in a shoebox and taught her to try picking them up with her toes. She had Ava press her knees into a belt held tight by Jonathan, who now sat on the ground beside her like a student learning from the best kind of teacher. The quiet kind. The kind who taught by doing, not talking. Amara explained how every nerve had a job, even if it had been silent for a long time. That silence didn't mean broken. It just meant forgotten. Jonathan began to help more. He learned how to massage the pressure points behind Ava's knees. He practiced the warm rice wrap himself at home. When Ava started tapping her toes without being asked, he didn't cheer loudly. He just knelt beside her and whispered, "I saw that," like it was a secret only they shared. But not every week was easy. One Sunday, the car pulled up later than usual. Ava wasn't smiling. Her eyes were red, her face pale. Jonathan looked tense again. He lifted her from the car gently, but with the heaviness of frustration hanging off his shoulders. "She doesn't want to do it today," he said quickly, his voice sharp with a mix of anger and disappointment. "She's tired." Ava kept her arms crossed as she sat in her chair. Her head turned slightly away from both of them. Amara approached slowly. "What happened?" she asked. Ava's voice cracked. "I tried to move my legs this morning. Nothing happened, nothing. I thought I was getting better. But it's just fake. I'm tired of trying. I'm tired of hoping." Jonathan looked away, jaw tight. "She's been frustrated all weekend, I get it." Amara knelt beside her again. "You think I never get tired?" she asked gently. "You think I didn't cry in a shelter when my mum couldn't afford her medicine and I just had to sit there and watch?" Ava's eyes shifted toward her, just slightly. "You're allowed to be mad," Amara continued. "I get mad too, but if you stop now, the part of you that wants to walk might stop trying too. I don't want you to give up, because I haven't." There was silence, the kind that settles when someone says the thing nobody wants to admit out loud. Then Ava whispered, "I'm scared." Jonathan froze. That was the first time she'd said it. Not to a doctor, not to him, to Amara. Amara leaned closer. "Me too," she said. "But scared doesn't mean stop. Scared means you're close. Real close." Ava wiped her face with her sleeve. "Okay, let's try again." They did. This time, Amara spoke less. She just moved with Ava, listened to her body, gave space for the moments between effort and exhaustion. Jonathan joined them without being asked, supporting Ava's weight when needed, guiding her knees with the belt they'd been using the past few weeks. And then it happened. Ava's right foot moved, not just her toes. Her entire foot slid forward, slow, stiff, like it was waking from a deep sleep. But it moved. Jonathan dropped to one knee beside her. "Do it again," he said, barely above a whisper. She did. Amara didn't say anything. She just sat back, notebook still untouched beside her, and watched. That night, Jonathan stood outside his house, staring at the moon through the trees. He didn't ask himself who Amara really was anymore. That question didn't matter. Inside, Ava was on the phone with her aunt, retelling the foot slide moment with the kind of joy he hadn't heard in over half a year. Laughter filled the kitchen, the kind that didn't feel like a break from sadness. It felt like a return to something lost. And Jonathan? He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long time, the thought of tomorrow didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a door. The following Saturday, the cold finally broke. The morning sun spilled across the cracked pavement of Harrington Park in wide golden streaks, softening the sharpness in the air and making the grass look almost green again, at least where it still clung to life. When Jonathan pulled up in the Mercedes, he wasn't alone. On the passenger seat beside him was a folded camp chair. In the back, tucked into the footwell, was an extra yoga mat. He didn't speak as he opened the door and lifted Ava into her chair, but his movements were lighter, more fluid, like he was no longer carrying the full weight of hopelessness. And Ava. She grinned before the wheels even touched the sidewalk. She didn't need to see Amara to know she was already there. She could feel it. Sure enough, under the now familiar oak tree, Amara had already laid everything out with quiet precision. Her green gym bag sat open beside her, a small sandwich wrapped in foil resting on top, untouched but placed there deliberately, like a ritual. Jonathan said nothing when he handed it to her. He didn't need to. Amara gave a small nod and tucked it away for later. "Ready, Ava?" she asked. "Let's do it," Ava said, excitement buzzing under her breath. This time, Jonathan didn't stand back. He dropped to the ground beside them, sitting cross-legged in the grass, mimicking Amara's movements when she stretched Ava's legs, even if he messed them up at first. At one point, Amara gave him a quick side-eye and said, "You're bending the wrong way." Jonathan smirked. "I haven't stretched since college." Ava laughed. A real one, loud and alive. It was becoming their rhythm. Warm cloth, simple stretches, socks rolled into tight balls for toe work, rubber bands looped around Ava's ankles, everything done with patience and quiet repetition. But then, 20 minutes in, Amara reached into her bag and pulled something new, a belt, soft but firm, folded neatly in half. She handed each end to Jonathan, then slid the middle under Ava's knees. "She's going to try to lift both," she said, looking Jonathan in the eye. "We help her balance. She does the work." He blinked. "Are you sure she's ready?" Amara didn't answer. She looked at Ava. "Are you?" Ava nodded once, no hesitation. They gave her a few seconds. Ava's brows drew together in concentration. She closed her eyes, and then her knees lifted. Not far, barely an inch. But both of them, moving in unison, guided gently by her will and the belt's steady resistance. Jonathan's mouth opened slightly, caught between disbelief and joy. "You did that?" "I did it," Ava whispered, as if confirming it for herself more than anyone. Amara didn't interrupt the moment. She just nodded, almost to herself. "The body remembers," she said softly. "You just have to be patient enough to let it talk." After the session, as Ava rested and drank water, Jonathan knelt beside Amara. His voice dropped low. "Where do you go after this?" She shrugged. "Around." "You got somewhere to sleep?" Amara hesitated. "Sometimes." Jonathan exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. "You ever think about coming to stay with us? Just for a while?" Amara's eyes flicked up in surprise. "You serious?" "I've got a guest room. You wouldn't be in the way." She looked down at her fingers. "You sure your neighbors wouldn't mind a kid like me?" Jonathan gave a short laugh. "After what you've done for my daughter, they'd better not say a word." She didn't answer right away, but the next morning she was there, standing at the Reeves' front door with her backpack slung over one shoulder and her rolled-up blanket tucked beneath her arm. Jonathan opened the door in sweatpants and a coffee mug in hand, eyebrows raised with a smile creeping through. Right on time. Ava appeared behind him in her pajamas. "Amara!" she shouted, wheeling herself forward. "Hey, superstar!" Amara said, grinning. Jonathan stepped aside. "Welcome home." The days that followed were quiet in the best kind of way. Amara got her own room, a small desk, clean sheets. The first night she sat on the bed and touched the pillow like she wasn't sure if it was real. But she never said much about it. She just showed up the next morning, towel in hand, stretching Ava's legs like clockwork. They built a rhythm, a partnership. Amara taught Ava how to wiggle her feet against resistance bands, how to massage her own calves when they tensed, how to listen to her body without judging it. And Ava, she listened, learned, improved. Her feet moved now, sometimes together, sometimes not, but always stronger than the week before. One night while Jonathan was washing dishes, he glanced toward the kitchen table where Amara sat sketching in her notebook. "You ever think about going back to school?" Amara looked up, blinking. "Sometimes." "You're smart," he said. "You could go far." "I want to help people walk again, like my mama." He turned to face her. "Then let's figure out how to get you there." She smiled. Not big, just enough. By then, the house no longer felt like a recovery ward. It felt like a home again. There were little noises everywhere. Ava's laughter from the living room, the soft scratch of Amara's pencil in her notebook, the occasional clink of Jonathan setting 2 mugs on the table instead of 1. The weight that had smothered every room for half a year had lifted. Not all at once, but enough to let the air back in. It started quietly, like most miracles do. A nurse walking her dog through the park one Sunday morning spotted a girl who looked a lot like Ava, except this girl was standing. Wobbling a bit, yes, but standing. She didn't approach, just watched from the distance, her breath catching in her throat as she recognized the kid who used to sit silently outside the hospital doors, now kneeling beside Ava with both hands steadying her legs. That nurse told her sister. Her sister worked in patient services. By Wednesday, 3 families at the Children's Medical Center had heard rumors of a little girl with a red hat who could do what doctors said would take years. By the next weekend, 2 new families were waiting at the park bench. One had a boy with a walker, the other a girl recovering from a stroke. Both parents had heard the same phrase whispered with awe, the girl who helped that Reeves kid move her legs. Jonathan turned to Amara. "You don't have to do this." Amara looked at the kids, then at Ava. "I want to." She gave up her usual hour with Ava to work with the newcomers. She showed their parents how to warm rice packs just right, how to rotate legs gently, how to talk to the body like it's listening. She spoke to the kids directly, not as patients, but as people. "You're not broken," she told one boy. "You're just learning a different way to be strong." Ava sat nearby in her wheelchair, hands folded in her lap, watching everything without a single complaint. Later that day in the car, she said, "I like watching her help people." Jonathan smiled into the rearview mirror. Yeah, Ava said. "It makes me feel like I'm part of something good." The next Sunday, 5 families came. The week after that, 11. A local pastor brought folding chairs. A diner started dropping off bagels and juice boxes. Someone printed flyers, free movement classes, Sundays at noon, Harrington Park. They didn't use Amara's name, but everyone knew. A reporter showed up 2 weeks later. Jonathan pulled Amara aside. "You okay with this?" She looked around. The kids wiggling toes, the parents learning stretches, Ava laughing with a girl in braces. She nodded. "As long as it's not about me, it's about them." The article ran on the second page of the Birmingham Sunday Post. 9-year-old with a gift helps dozens heal in a city park. They didn't publish her full name. She asked them not to. But word spread. A local physician offered to mentor her. A non-profit reached out to fund supplies. Someone else offered free tutoring. But Amara never changed. She still rolled out her towel the same way, still wore the same coat, still used the same taped-up boots, and before she helped anyone else, she always started with Ava. Then came the 9th Sunday. The air was warmer, the trees quieter. Ava said less on the drive over. She just stared out the window with a look on her face like she was carrying a secret, a quiet strength. When they arrived, the crowd was already waiting. Families, therapists, teachers, kids on walkers and in chairs. Some came to help, some came to hope. Amara knelt beside Ava and whispered, "Same as before. We help you stand. You do the rest." Jonathan took his place behind her, hands firm under Ava's arms. Amara positioned her legs with slow care. "On 3, she said. Ava nodded. 1, 2, 3. They lifted. Ava's legs wobbled, her arms shook, but she stood, on her own feet. The crowd hushed, every breath held. Ava opened her eyes and smiled. "I'm standing," she whispered. Jonathan's hands trembled. He stepped back. She didn't fall. She's doing it," he said, his voice catching. Amara stepped back, eyes wide but calm. "She's been doing it." Ava took one step, then another. Then, because she was 6 and didn't know how to be afraid, she took a third. Then she stumbled forward into her father's arms, both of them laughing, crying, shaking. "You did it," he whispered into her hair. "You said I would," Ava told Amara. Amara just smiled. "I said we'd try." No one left the park right away. People stayed, hugged, prayed, sat together in silence. Amara found her place on the bench and watched it all, her heart full and quiet. Later that night, Jonathan stood in the kitchen while Amara poured cereal. "You know you changed everything," he said. Amara didn't look up. "I did?" Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder. "My daughter walked today. Not because of a machine, not because of a miracle pill, because a kid with nothing decided to show up, again and again, even when no one asked. Amara nodded. That's what my mum would have done. Jonathan's voice wavered. I wish she could have seen this. She did, Amara said. I think she sees everything. He wiped his eyes. You're going to change a lot of lives, Amara. She looked at him and said softly, I already am.